kind of what's causing essentially all your breakdowns. And I believe if we clean this one thing up, and if we just kind of figure that one piece that's going to allow you to do this more efficiently, you're going to automatically just, it's going to be fun, dude. I'm pumped. So you'll see, I don't even know if I have to show you because I know we've talked about this in the past, but as you kind of get into your drive phase, you notice how you get real squat dominant. You lack the ability to hip hinge efficiently, and you'll see right off the bat that the heel, I know you're on the ground force plate, but you'll see that the heel disconnects and you go. So what we need to talk about is all of the kind of breakdowns that stem from this one single thing. And I want to say the one biggest one that I think is really, you know, prohibiting you from expressing extremely high power output is your ability to create as much separation. We talk about hip shoulder separation, your ability to create and build up rotational energy or torque, whatever you want to call it. So you'll see that since you do get into a more of a squat pattern and a early heel disconnection, this kind of prohibits you from really creating optimal amount of stretch as you kind of get into your drive phase. So you'll see it here. Let me see if I can go mouse view. So you'll see it here as you kind of descend and you create, you know, you good knee to knee separation. Again, arm pass stuff is something that I wanted to talk about, but I'm gonna leave that be for now until your next analysis. But just notice how your pelvis is kind of in line with your shoulders the whole way, right? So you like think about like your hip bones and then your shoulders, and they're just in line, right? They're moving in line together. What we see with a lot of high power output guys is that when they are in their drive phase, they are able to segment, they're able to separate the shoulders and the hips. So when they go and they approach front foot strike and that lead leg is going, you'll see that counter rotation of the trunk and the pelvis occurs. So you create that buildup of rotational energy, and then front foot strike occurs. You'll see the hips open, and then it's boom, all at once. So Bumgardner, I know that's your boy, has a really good visual of this. You know, obviously he's a little lower arm slot than you, but notice his ability to go into his drive phase and then create that rotational energy. So right there, see that front hip opening, but that back shoulder is counter rotating, right? So you're creating this. So think of it like that rubber band analogy. I actually have one right here. So you create that stretch as much as you can, and then when it comes time to fire, it's boom, I've created all of that energy. And what you're doing right now is you're in your drive phase and you create like a little bit, and then it just goes boop, boop, instead of like whoop, boom, right? So that's all that rotational power that we could potentially have that we're just not having. And I believe it's a byproduct of your inability to really get into an efficient hip hinge pattern due to the ankle. So when I do the recap video, we're going to talk about some things that we can really hammer home and maybe really like assess your actual ankle mobility and dorsiflexion, see if we have the capacity in that, and then just try to find ways to strengthen that. I'll head out back and talk about that, but I think we're really close. I think the heel disconnection, the inability to hip hinge is really going to be the #1 key, because that's going to take care of a lot of things as we get into our delivery. So I think you've heard me talk about this in the past before, where like the initial move of our delivery, right, is going to be the most crucial piece of the delivery. Why? Because that's going to set up all of the efficient movements as we go down the hill, or even just in throwing mechanics in general, right? So we got to put ourselves in the best possible positions in the initial move, and it's usually the initial move of the drive phase, right? So boom here, to be efficient, you know, elsewhere. So like I talked about in the screen is the heel disconnection, the squat pattern, right, which I struggle with as well, and the squat pattern is really limiting you from the ability to create a lot of elastic rotational energy and then out through hand. Whenever we talk about like the heel thing, right, it could be a number of different things as to why you're not doing it, because I think we've talked in the past before, and that's something that got brought up, was the heel connection and staying grounded and connected to the ground. So a couple things of why maybe that's not, you know, coming as easy as you thought, was potentially just lacking the dorsiflexion, ankle mobility, and that could be something that's, you know, self-assessed. I mean, I have really good ankle dorsiflexion, so that's why I could crack that back knee kind of over my foot, but I'm still staying connected to the ground. This is going to be my drive leg, my drive foot. Notice how far I can go forward with my knee, and while keeping contact with the heel back here, right? So that's something that you can self-assess, and by self-assess, basically just, you know, test it yourself and see if that's something that you need to work on. The other piece to this, do everything barefoot, because the next piece is establishing like the sensory input, an understanding of the feeling of the ground. I think oftentimes, and this is just kind of in life and human beings in general, we wear shoes, so like the sensory input that we usually have from the foot to the ground is not there, because we're always in shoes or cleats or whatever. So I would encourage you to do a lot of things barefoot. And if we can stay connected longer, that's going to give ourselves an ability to really get into a hinge pattern. You can also look at it kind of the flip side, right? Where it's like, well, if we can just hinge better, then we'll stay connected. So that's the next piece that I wanted to talk about, was really owning that hip hinge. You don't have to use stick mobility. You can simply use like a wall with your hand, right? But it's the feeling that we're trying to get when we're getting into the hinge, right? So hip hinge at the hip, hip hinge at the hips, hinging at the hips, obviously, and then getting into our drive phase. Again, this is gonna provide that feeling for like, okay, dude, like I feel my foot into the ground, I feel connection with the heel, I'm almost pressing and pulling the ground with my toes, and you're just creating that feeling. And notice how that knee is not cracking over here, you're really forcing that position here, you know, and then really just challenging that range. And then I think once you get a grasp and a concept for that feeling that we're trying to create, then you can move towards more of like some box variations. Press into the ground with the foot, boom. So again, this will give us a pretty good idea of, can we get into that position? Do we have the movement capacity to get into that position? Do we have the drive leg stability to hold that force and then begin to transfer that force, right? Counter rotation is going to be the thing that's going to allow you to throw harder, but you also need to be able to do the hinge pattern first, because counter rotation, you can't essentially force the counter rotation when your direction towards home plate is already off. You know what I mean? So again, emphasis on, let's really focus on that hinging pattern and that heel connection first. We're there. I think you're going to gain 8 miles an hour in probably 2 months.